thank you all for coming. We're very pleased. We, as the Geography and Anthropology Department at LSU, are very pleased to be hosting this event in collaboration with the LSU Libraries, and we're thrilled that you're here to join us. Our purpose here today is to celebrate the career and the many, many diverse contributions of H. Jesse Walker, a man of many, many distinctions. LSU recognized him as a Boyd Professor. The leading international geographical associations, the Royal Geographical Society and the American Association of Geographers, awarded him among their highest honors, respectively the Patron's Medal from the RGS, and the Distinguished Career Award from the AAG. It's important to note that Jess was not about self-promotion and about gaining these awards. He went out and earned them over a long and dedicated career. He was steadfast in his service to the university and the department and participation in these professional organizations. He was a strong and effective leader in our department and helped build a remarkable faculty, some of which are here today. He was an ambassador par excellence for LSU and for our department. He was a consummate professional networker, even before the term was commonly used, both nationally and internationally. I could go on all afternoon, but I refer you to the wonderful memorial statement written by Kent Matthewson, one of my colleagues, which is back at the table by the main entrance. But beyond Jess's professional accolades, he was a devoted family man, and several members of his family are here with us today. Rita and her daughters Angie and Winona are here, I know, and then I want to point out that Rita and the family hosted countless events. I remember as a graduate student going to crawfish boils. I've been in their house to parties and to dinners, and without a doubt, the work that Rita did in opening her house up to distinguished geographers from around the world helped build our department, helped build geography at LSU, and helped fortify Jess's career. So through this general act, she was a steadfast partner. And she traveled around to the far corners of the globe with Jess, and I'm sure played a big role in all his successes. And we're very proud that you're all here today with us today. Several of his former students are here, and they're going to recount some of his contributions and his role of mentoring and shaping their careers. And we'll also hear from the library staff about some of his donations to the archives. But before I introduce them, I want to ask Fa Wei Wang, our department chair, to offer a formal welcome.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, so foremost, on behalf of the department, I welcome the family and the friends of Jesse Walker and everybody. And I also want to thank Craig, Lida, and Linda, and all of our staff worked very hard for putting this together. I was given 2 minutes, so let's say, I want to just talk a little bit about the Jesse Walker. I moved to LSU in 2007, so I have a cheating sheet, used the PPT, a little help. So first, I want to, so with 2 minutes, I want to talk a little bit about, the Jesse Walker that most of you will talk about this research and are more capable of commenting on, how much important contributing academically. I want to talk about more on my personal level. First, I moved upstairs across the hall from Jesse shortly before I became the chair, so that was very good timing. I don't think I would survive the chairship without this close access to Jesse. So you can't get closer than I was, just across the hall, So because of this, convenience, and the geography talk about the distance decay. So, I was certainly a very advantaged location. So he showed me this, okay, those, before this, Dick Kessel showed me the picture, okay. So on the right side, okay, this is Jesse's record, okay. He began his chair in 1963, and he counted at that time the full-time equivalent faculty is 5.3. See, he's so quantitative, accurate. So 5.3. And by the end of his chairship, 1968, okay, I see some of them like Tony Lewis, you see, Miles Richardson, and who else on this, I had the privilege, Bob Muller. So by the end of his term, he counted is 16 and a half, okay? So he said, far away, okay? So I was able to triple the faculty number during my chairship. I said, okay, I think we're in a different time of year because most of the time, Jesse was able to hire someone, make the decision by himself at the airport lounge over a glass of bourbon. Okay, well, so we are very different now. Okay, so I'm very proud of what Jesse did for the department. So second, I want to talk very quickly about before globalization became fashionable. Okay, Jesse was the true ambassador for internationalization. Okay, and I get to know Jesse because I was the director of Chinese Culture and Commerce program for 6 years. Okay, so he was among the first delegations of U.S. American exchange of geographers, and in 2007, this year, I decided to come to LSU at the AG in San Francisco. He was there with the group. Okay, so he made 9 trips to China, and he always talked with me about when I will make the 10th trip. And actually we were working on his 10th trip. Okay, I'm very, very sorry that we didn't make it happen. Okay, and also the best multi, all of my friends know that I'm passionate about the best multi I had was Jesse brought back on his first trip from Tongji University. The president of Tongji gave him the multi. So think about it, he brought the multi back in 1977, and after 20 plus years, okay, the multi become the very best at Jesse's course. I still remember that. Another point I want to make finally is Jesse, okay, is just a caring person, okay? Just care about the livelihood of the very disadvantaged in the developing countries, okay? Toward the end of his life, okay, I think sometime in March, okay, he showed me an article. He was still working on a short article about how the farmers, the fish farmers in the Pearl River Delta area on the coast make a sustainable living without changing the land use pattern of the coast area and make this living. And he asked me to check some of the Chinese spellings. Okay, so without further ado, I just want to conclude my talk. I miss him very, very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fa-Wei. We do have some seats down front if anybody who's come in late wants to find a space to park. I'm going to run through a quick introduction of the speakers who had some working relationship with Jess, people who were generally his students, and then we'll move through that group in turn. Our first speaker will be Don Davis, who is a Sea Grant scholar, and like Jess, he's a California transplant, and he has become a certified card-carrying local expert on Louisiana and coastal Louisiana. He's published on a wide array of coastal topics, including his most recent massive tome entitled Washed Away, about the coastal populations of Louisiana. He's devoted considerable time to public service as well, most notably working with the Louisiana Oil Spill Coordinator's Office, and also assisting with the most recent Coastal Master Plan. Don will be followed by Tara and Jennifer, who are two of my favorite librarians here at LSU, and are truly skilled professionals. Tara is principally engaged with managing the archives and working with the traditional documentary records that find their way into the library. And Jennifer administers the oral history program at LSU, and they'll provide a discussion about Jess's contributions to the library and how that will be woven into the collections. Bob Baumann, who was a student here at the same time I was back in the 70s, who's now owner of Hood, Baumann and Associates, became the ultimate mover and shaker here in Baton Rouge. He headed up the Center for Energy Studies on campus, serves as a served on the State Energy Commission, and built an impressive list of contacts in industry, government, and the university. And he's been an incredibly dependable friend when the department needed help raising funds to create endowed professorships, to fund research facilities, and to bolster the department's programs in many different ways. Molly McGraw is a more recent graduate, and she gained an inspiration from Jess as a graduate student after he had retired. And she gained this interest in permafrost and the permafrost landscapes of the Arctic. And this led to several years of collaboration working closely with Jess in the last several years. And she also holds the distinction of being the co-author of Jess's penultimate scholarly publication that just appeared this past fall in Focus in Geography. And finally, another contemporary of mine, Klaus Meyer-Arendt, who was longtime chair at the University of West Florida, and was also, like Jess, very active in the professional organizations. He chaired specialty groups, and he promoted the AAG. He took me to my first AAG meeting back in 1977. And it's worth mentioning that his work on coastal recreation in the Gulf of Mexico was not restricted to the Gulf of Mexico that we tend to think about, Florida to Texas. No, he had to go and do the entire Gulf of Mexico from Yucatan to the tip of Florida. And I will let these folks come forward and share some thoughts with you about their experiences working with Jess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don, is this yours?
Yes. Hey, how y'all are? This is going to be very difficult for me, but I will get through it. My wife knows very well how much Jess Walker meant to me. Rita, my mama. I have 3 daughters. Didn't even know I know. But one thing's for sure, Jess Walker was a superb individual. And what I'd like to look at now is some of my remembrances, if I can get this to work.
That you'll have to use the mouse, or the arrows. I'll just do this.
Yeah, I'm intellectually challenged as well. That being said, under full disclosure, I'm Jeff Walker's second PhD. As noted to you, he was a friend. I first heard the name Jesse Walker in 1964. I was a floundering student at California State University, East Bay, originally Hayward, majoring in international relations and uncomfortable. A very good friend of mine from high school, second grade, had taken a summer course at UC Berkeley from somebody named H. Jesse Walker. He suggested I should perhaps major in geography. I took up the challenge. And there we get all of the connecting axes of Jess Walker, UC Berkeley. My first cultural geography was from Roger Trindell, an early LSU graduate. I took Division Geomorphology from Slim Bauer, a Laley student and a contemporary of Jess's. And when we did field work, if there was a lock on a fence he thought he could go through because Laley did it, we carried an appropriate axe to get in. I took courses from Thomas Pagenhart, who is also a contemporary of Jess's, and Rita, I think he dated his sister. More importantly, he was one of the visiting professors at LSU. My mentor advisor was Bill Thomas, perhaps best known for editing the volume Man's Role in Changing the Face of the Earth, and was instrumental in convincing me that perhaps I was graduate school material. At his suggestion, I visited LSU in 1966. In September, I came on campus, I walked unannounced into Jess Walker's office, and I introduced myself. He immediately handed off me to John Reeder, and I was chauffeured around campus, and after an hour and a half, I left. The following year, I was a graduate student. And this was a time when the meet and greet were held by the graduate students, specifically Pat McCloy, Jim McCloy, Suki, and Fritz Grichner. Now, Pat McCloy was the executive assistant for Jack Gilmore, who was the AD at LSU for some 27 years, and somehow, as if by magic, Earl Grove, at that time playing for the Philadelphia Eagles on his way to join the Pittsburgh Steelers, loaned us their house on Nicholson. Now, I don't remember everything of that event, but I can assure you the bathtub was filled up 3 times with beer, and it ended up about 4 in the morning. It is certainly one of the infamous moments because a well-respected geography staff member, if I would use your name, you would recognize, had to be carried and physically put to bed by the Walker family. Shortly thereafter, the event moved to 1250 Thibodeau in the afternoon, where there was a volleyball net. For those of you with a country background, a 5-gallon, well actually a number 5 wash tub filled with Fisher's beer. It was cheap. Jess would put it under his arm like this and walk around talking to people. But what a lot of folks don't know is that Jess has been my friend for just short of half a century. And I want to point out to you he's more than a counselor, a tutor, or advisor. Indeed, at one time, Jess was the mascot at UC Berkeley. And he would always stroll around talking to people at these events. And incidentally, by way of a footnote, Bob Baumann became the official bartender because I think he could control him. That being said, Jess would point out that he got in front of 50,000 people and rode a unicycle. And of course, the graduate students had to try. None of them made it. But what he failed to tell you was that he only did it once. But it was a big event. Well, the party at Grow led to me beginning to think about, where am I? Why am I here? And to those of you that remember Jeff of the time period, under the breath of the graduate students, they referred to him as a Marine drill instructor. The girls remember the real tiny hair, ramrod straight, right? I'm walking down the hall, and we're chatting, and I just had a conversation with my father. Now, in the interest of complete disclosure, I grew up on arguably the most blue-collar community in the western part of the United States. My dad was an operating engineer, a teamster, and worked with longshoremen. He was not Eric Hofer, but he believed in many of the things that the longshoreman philosopher put out, particularly related to learning and education. And I was talking to my dad, and I said, Dad, I never met anybody like this before. And he said, what do you mean, son? I said, oh, this has gone crazy. I said, well, I can talk to anybody. I can't talk to Jeff Walker. He gave me 2 things to remember, son. Everybody puts on their pants 1 leg at a time. And the folks, same as the people. So with that as the background, I'm going down the hall, and I hear this voice. Mr. Davis, what cardinal direction are you walking? Now that gets your attention. I looked up, and it's Jeff Walker. I said, west, sir. He's about to leave, and I said, Jeff, Mr. Walker, I plan to be here a while. And all my friends call me Don. I expect you to do the same thing. For 50 years, I've been Don. More importantly, Jess is one of the few people, and my wife will tell you this, that can call me Donnie Wayne. Because that's only family. Well, with that being said, we have to understand that from Otsky the Bear, Jess in 2013 was invited to Cal. He went out on the football field. He was one of a very few members of the Marine Corps Flying Golden Bears, and he was recognized. And Rita, trust me, he made the biggest mistake of his life, not inviting you. And I fussed him. Gladly fussed him. But when you think of Jeff Walker and his career, keep in mind that he was a field person. He was an adventurer. Whether you believed in R.J. Russell or Carl Sauer, Jeff was in the front line of doing things, quite frankly, his way. His first PhD student was Jim McCloy. To me, Sir James. Sir James, for 36 years, was active at the Texas A&M Galveston campus, held every administrative position but president, including chief of police, died unfortunately in 2008 and 2012. He had an arena named after him. Now I know a number of you in here have the highest award LSU gives. Do you think you will outlive your first PhD student? And do you think your first PhD student will have a building named after him? You'll know who's standing in the front of the line. Well, I graduated from LSU in 1972. Woody Gagnano was on my committee. Jess was there. I accepted a job at Nicholls State University, and it was a good place to be, particularly for the next 18 years. Jess calculated, I didn't, that if the maximum amount of miles on an automobile before you traded in was 100,000, I put 100,000 plus, wore out a car and a half, commuting back and forth to LSU. We first got involved in field trips with the AAG in New Orleans in 1978. Indeed, Jess apparently got a great deal of feedback because over the years I've conducted field trips for Eston Evans, Kenneth Walton, David Hillings, Dennis Brunston, Bill Ritchie, Paulo Fabri, Roland Paskov, Wilbur Zielinski, Hideo Yamanuchi, innumerable Chinese, innumerable Japanese, innumerable Russians. In fact, one Russian wanted me to get him an alligator handbag. I said, Jess, does he know what that costs? I can get it. Well, he told him we didn't have to do that. Chin-Fin Lee, Provost, Shanghai National University. Just said, Don, we need a plane. Got a plane, high wing, went out, fly, got up. Within 3 minutes, Mr. Lee was like this. Jess and I had a great conversation. And I was pleased to take him in the field. We would go to the Waddell Williams Museum where he saw the Model 44. Believe it or not, in 1933, it was the fast propeller-driven aircraft in the world. We looked at Vietnamese fishing boats, and I made sure he took a picture of 3 signs: WPA Lane, Yeehaw Boulevard, and Fo's Oil Company. Fo's Court. He said, Don, why are we doing that? That's the oil company that drilled the first successful oil well in Terrebonne Parish. And a number of times I would go out on trips. I went to Bay St. Louis with him. He wanted to go over and meet Hank Spalak and Pat O'Neill. We were going to get Landsat data for him to look at the Colville. Got the data coming home, driving back towards Baton Rouge, and I mentioned my wife and I had gone to Montpelier to Bear Creek Western Store. He said, what? I said, Jeff Walker, how long have you been here? You had never been there, so we went north on 51, west on 16, and parked. And we had a great stay. I have it on very good information that Rita went shortly thereafter, and the Niffins and the Walkers went often. I'm guilty. In addition, I came to his office one day. I said, Jeff, let's go get something to eat. He said, yeah, where? So we're going to the moon. The moon? Yeah, the moon. Some of you have been around here remember that as you go out Nicholson, you cross over right there at Lee Drive and you run down, and there was this little hole in the wall. Now the moon was the silver moon, and you got the best smothered chicken, white beans and rice, greens, cornbread, and in addition to that, great cobbler. Now just to get ahead of him for a moment, Jess was a part of the Great Depression. Those of you over 60, you either your parents went through the Depression, or perhaps you went to the Depression. Now, if you go out to eat, no offense to Angie in the audience, and you get yourself a bowl that's about the size of a Frisbee and 1.5 inches thick, Well, I went up to the moon and I told the lady, this fella needs some cobbler. Now, y'all remember everyday dishes? Well, that's a dish for cobbler. And I filled that sucker. And Jess Walker and I crawled out of that place. Shortly thereafter, I get a call that said, Don, I got a visitor. Somebody had a great pedigree. I said, you want to go to the moon? Up until his death, I heard stories about that fellow reporting back to the moon. I took him to state police to have cafeteria food, and I missed a meeting at Louis'. And you might ask me, how could you miss a meeting at Louis'? I said it was hard. But there was a publication being put together for Jess, and I knew Dennis Brunson was involved. I knew that Dennis was talking to Jess, and if the word got out, I didn't want to have to look Jess in the eye and lie, so I missed the meeting. That being said, when we did field trips, it's important for you to know that I went to Sally Sippermore, Holly Beach, and we revisited a site that Jess went with, Fred Niffen, Bill Haig, Aki Sunborg. We went the upper and middle part of Bayou Lafourche. We were constantly on the road again. That being said, his never-ending curiosity, his focus on fieldwork, and understanding of people in regions outside of the United States made Jess and Rita a traveling pair. Indeed, I was fortunate enough to go to Japan with Jess in 1980. Europe in 1984 with Norb Sudi and Jim McCloy, Sir James. And of course, Andre Gilshay, Paulo Fabri. We were in Chile in 1989, and we were in China together in 1999. Indeed, Johnny Cash had it right. He was a traveling man. Boston, Charleston, Dayton, Louisiana, Washington, Houston, Kingston, Texarkana, Monterey, Faraday, Santa Fe, Tallapoosa, Glen Rock, Black Rock, Little Rock, Alcaloosa, Tennessee, Spirit Lake, Grand Lake, Devil's Lake, Crater Lake. And that's what Johnny Cash said. But where did Jess go? Point Barrow, Tuktoyaktuk, Tokyo, Beijing, Tibet, Shanghai, Pearl River, Korea, Hawaii, New Caledonia, Tuvalu, Nandi, Bougainville, Galapagos, Chile, Italy, France, United Kingdom, Portugal, Nairobi, Addis Ababa, Cairo, Panama, Guatemala, when Pete Taylor and his wife and Rita and a party of 8 went there, and all of them got their pockets picked, except they stole Rita's necklace off her neck. So it wasn't always comfortable travel. And then Saudi Arabia, Winnemucca, Grass Valley, took the children to Los Angeles, Quebec in their 1957 Chevrolet wagon. That's when they really had a wagon. Portland, Salt Lake City, Seattle, and the Seychelles and Mauritius, and I just got started. He was particularly pleased earlier this year when he learned that the Mauritius LSU Alumni Association had more than 100 members. And it goes back to 1964 when Bill McIntyre and Jess were working on tropical cyclones in coastal Louisiana. Somebody asked Jess, and I was there, what's the best place you visited? His answer was always the same, the last one. At 90, Jess and Rita traveled 6,000 miles at 90. And we're talking about it, and I said, Jess, do you realize that if I get to 90, I don't know if I want to drive, can drive, or my wife wants to sit next to me for 6,000 miles, and the kids haven't taken all the damn keys. And you know what he did? Do you know where Winnemucca is? I said, yes. I went north of Winnemucca. I said, you went north of Winnemucca? That's just sheep herders. I know, Rita, no matter how hard I taught him, he would never find a place to sleep when he got up in the morning. The adventure was trying to find a place to sleep. He couldn't find one up in the Basque Country of Nevada, but he survived. Shortly thereafter, he drove to Mystic Seaport to talk about a sea chest that belonged to one of Evelyn Pruitt's ancestors. He was very proud, and I was in his office a great deal. He was very proud of Geoscience and Man, which I think is close to 40 volumes. The second one was Malcolm Como's dissertation, certainly those related to environment, coastal research. And when you start looking at this volume, and you start looking at the names, it's a tribute to who Jess Walker was. They include Gary Dunbar, Eugene Wilson, John Fraser Hart, Homer Ashman, Philip Wagner, Peter Wacker, Henry Glassy, Tony Orem, Bill Haig, Wesley Marks, Mark Hirschman, Sam Hilliard, Joel Hedgepeth, Jonathan Sauer, Francis Shepard, J.O. Norman, Bruce Tom, Kenneth Walton, Jim Coleman, Don Wright, Warren Grayboe, Edward Weisblatt, Harry Roberts, Rod Emmer, and others. It's a who's in the geography profession. He was very proud of being a Boyd. Indeed, the Boyd professorship was bestowed on Jess. He held it in the highest honor. And those of you not familiar with the Boyd, among a lot of young faculty members, these individuals are LSU rock stars, although they may not think it. I know many of them, like Bob Baumann, our education has been certainly crafted by up to 7. In slightly more than 7 years, this is established and has less than 40 people in it. And if you want something to think about for a moment, we spent a lot of time in the Hal Russell building. Maybe it should be Hal, Russell, Niffen, West, Walker, Coleman, Roberts. Point is, if you let me cheat a little bit, one out of every 5 Boyds spent time in that building. That's an accomplishment, ladies and gentlemen, and he was indeed my friend. He received all kinds of honors, but I think the Patron's Medal is particularly important. I make the assumption, and you can argue with me, but it's the geographical equivalent of the Nobel. Yet we know every damn athlete in this state that might get a Heisman, but you have no bloody clue who Jess Walker was. Check the names. Alexander Bosch, Henry Stanley, famous for Doctor Who, Livingston, I presume. John Arrowsmith, Robert Scott, Rao Amson, William Davis, Sir Edmund Hillary, Thor Heyerdahl, Kon-Tiki fame, and Richard Leakey. And right there is H. Jesse Walker. He was hard times in Morro Bay. And I'm about out of time, but I want to digress for a moment. Everyone in here that has a terminal degree has 2 lives. One you showcase as your professional, and one that you keep quiet as your home life, if you will. So I'm going to digress a moment. I think you would not disagree. Jess Walker went to San Luis Obispo High School, best known as SLO. Note, he was a Tiger early on. Later on, he went to Morro Bay High School, and sometime in the early 1900s, he established an endowment based on an essay. Who has been the most influential person in your life? That was at SLO. He moved up in about 1995, and he established one with Rita and his sister at Morro Bay High School. Now, many of you know Jess was in the Bishop Ott Center, and I was fortunate enough to visit him, and I always brought him a milkshake, and we were sitting there one day, he said, "Don, would you go get my mail for me?" Sure. And he threw the mail down and went through it, and he had one letter. One letter. He opened that very carefully, and he read it with pride. The award for the next endowment went to a young man. And I don't know if anybody in here knows anybody in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but there is a performer, Bo Diddley, that has a catchphrase. Stay in school and get your PhD. To do that, you need a little funds. And the Walker household have provided those funds. And the household includes his 3 daughters. Pawpaw had 9 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren. 3 were born before 1984. He retired. None was over 5. And the remaining 11 after he retired. I heard a great deal about his grandchildren because Jess and Rita underwrote all of the books for all their grandchildren. Now, some of them were a tad tardy in turning in their book slips so he could reimburse them. Now, those of you in this room, I want you to understand that your grandfather was not boudet to you. Like every PhD in here, we got little boxes in our head. And if we don't check it off, we are upset. Had nothing to do with you, it had everything to do to check it off. And he wanted it checked off. So Jeff was my friend. See the patent medal there? I'm in his house and Rita says, Don, would you get him in order? Jeff Walker. Yes, ma'am. He didn't want anybody to know about his medal. And to the grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, I said, Jeff Walker, that ain't right. I don't always have to talk professor. I said, that ain't right. What do you mean? Your great-grandchildren need to know your accomplishments as well as your grandchildren. I think I won. Didn't win many, but I think I won. And when we're talking about people, we can't forget Rita Walker. Because walking in lockstep with Jeff, whether it be in Turkey or some other far place in the world, was Rita Walker. She had to eat, and did it with pride, in Alaska, muck-tuck and white blubber, flying on a float plane to the Blow River Delta. Now, isn't that as romantic as you can get? And they had dinner on the Isle of Capri with the girls. Now, to the girls, I want to point out one thing. You all know, and you don't tell your mom and daddies everything you did in Europe. But in Europe, you were there for like 16, 18 months. And your daddy came back a changed man. Now, what you have to understand is you're very close with Jim McCloy. I was very close with Jim McCloy. I'd go to Galveston office. He said, you know, Don, I got a letter from Jeff Walker. Really? Yeah, in Europe, he rediscovered his children. I don't think they were ever lost. But I'm damn glad he rediscovered you. Because I have the inside track on more than you want me to know. So that being said, I'd just like to point out something. That's a nice quote. It's to me from Jeff. Jeff was my friend, my mentor. I never knew him as somebody that had all these accolades. More importantly, if you run the back roads of South Louisiana as much as I have, and you know any Akadi, if the Akadi call you Pana, Jeff was my Pana. What does that mean? Always has your back. Thank you very much. I just shot the whole timeline out.
There will be no reception. We'll bring up Jennifer and Tara next. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Don.
Well, that's not a tough act to follow. Thanks, Don. First off, I just want to thank everybody for coming and also to welcome you to Hill Memorial Library here in Special Collections. Like Craig said, I work here. I'm the curator of manuscripts and my colleague Jen, oral history. We're very pleased to be part of this today, and I think you'll understand a little bit more why as we talk a little bit. First, I do want to say I'm just the latest in a long line of librarians here at LSU who had a special relationship with, Dr. Walker, foremost Faith Phillips, who is here in the audience today, so I just wanted to give her a little shout out too. She's the one who introduced me to Dr. Walker, and that leads to my earliest memory of him, was being invited along with several of my colleagues from the libraries to lunch with him at Mansour's. And at the time I thought, wow, he's really figured out how smart it is to make friends with the librarians. And given how prolific a researcher and writer he was, whether that was just a byproduct of his use of the library or a conscious effort on his part, I can't say for sure. But he certainly appreciated his librarians, as he called them. As a curator of manuscripts, much of my recent experience has been going through Dr. Walker's papers and books as we work to make arrangements with the family to acquire them to be part of our collections here at Hill. In doing that, I've come to think that maybe he had a bit of the librarian in him himself, given the way he organized and cataloged everything, and I see lots of nods. If you've been in his office, then you know what I'm talking about. He was also a long-time and active member of the Friends of the LSU Libraries. Yet another example of his interest in and support of library issues was his participation in a pilot project for what became the Louisiana Digital Library, when the digital library at LSU and digital libraries really in general were in their infancy. He provided over 2,000 objects from his 40-plus year study of the Colville River Delta to be digitized and made available online. This included published and unpublished papers, charts, graphs, maps, notes, photographs, and aerial photographs. To me, this is such an excellent example of how engaged Dr. Walker was, and his willingness to share his materials in this way advanced the establishment of the Louisiana Digital Library, which now provides online access to over 150,000 digital items drawn from 22 libraries, museums, archives, research centers across the state. Perhaps his most visible library legacy will be the placement of his papers here in special collections, along with some of his books that will be both here in Hill and Middleton. Given that he was a Boyd professor, as Don said, the highest level of recognition that the university confers on faculty, and his worldwide reputation for his scholarship, we are so pleased to be able to make his research, writings, correspondence, and selected photographs and slides part of our collections. Through them, no doubt he will continue to contribute to the scholarship of the field that he loved so much. I'll turn it over to Jen.
So thanks, Tara, and thank you, Craig, for inviting us to be part of this. It is truly an honor to be here today. And as Tara said, Jess Walker was indeed a friend of the libraries. In particular, he was very supportive of oral history. I first met Jess through Faye Phillips when he was helping the center put together a presentation on Professor William Hague based on the oral history that Jess had actually conducted with Dr. Hague years ago. So Jess was sharing photos and stories and feedback, and then from talking to Jess, it was and how amazing, seeing how amazingly organized he was with the chapters of his life, it became readily apparent that we needed to do an oral history with Jess as well. So over a 6-year period from 2003 through 2009, and over 20 sessions later, we completed his oral history narrative, although I'm pretty sure that Jess never really felt that we were truly finished, as he had even more to share while he continued to work and contribute to his field. Jess was an inspiration in this special way that he enjoyed his calling so much. His work was part of who he was. It was never a drudgery, the way that so many people feel about their work at some point in life. He had a twinkle in his eye, and he made each chapter of his life an adventure. Whether it was living in a tent in Morro Bay, California during the Great Depression and helping support his family even as a boy, or flying transport planes as a Marine aviator in the Pacific Theater during World War II, or driving a pickup truck for Carl Sauer on an exploration through Mexico, or helping lay the foundation for a geography program at Georgia State, meeting his wife Rita and starting a family, working for the U.S. Office of Naval Research, embarking on his career in geography at LSU, helping expand the geography and anthropology program during his time here, and conducting research in coastal geography and traveling all over the globe as an ambassador to his field. I will miss the coffee breaks with Jess, where he regaled me with stories of his latest adventures, his latest travels, provided me updates on the research that he was conducting on all his protégés' research, many of whom are in this audience today, and sharing the connections that he had made. He was such a matchmaker. He was always, this position is open and I know this person has these skills, or this person's doing this research and I know that they would be really good. He was just so good at kind of moving around all those puzzle pieces. And I really enjoyed listening to him. And the campus is surely an emptier place without Jess Walker. And knowing Jess was a real gift, and I feel luckier for having had that pleasure. Thanks to his oral history contributions, there are over 20 hours of stories from Jess that you all can listen to. They're available through LSU Libraries. The information is right there on the page. And information on how to access these collections are right there as well. So on that note, I'd like to leave you all with a story from Jess. In this clip, he had just finished talking about his service in World War II in the Pacific, and how he had returned to California to UCLA and to Berkeley to finish up his undergraduate career that he had started prior to the war. Here he recounts his love of traveling and how his adventure driving across Mexico with Berkeley geography professor Klaus Meyer-Arendt helped lead Jess on his career path.
Back, if you want. Well, for the full 3 months, a little bit less than 3 months. Truck. And then when you get down,
What was it that you loved so much about travel?
seeing new areas, places, and peoples, and so on. I wasn't too aggressive as far as meeting individuals are concerned. I was probably a little standoffish in that regard. But just getting out on the highway and seeing the countryside. And of course, I think it's certainly partly because of that and the traveling I did in the South Pacific that led me to decide to take geography as a major field. So the last semester before my bachelor's degree, I decided that when I got my bachelor's degree, I was going to take off for the summer. And I said, what better could I do than to take and ride a bicycle through Mexico for 3 months? So I went in after the final exams and everything, I went into Mr. Sauer and I said, I'm getting ready to ride my bicycle down through Mexico, spend the summer doing this. Which routes would you suggest that I take? And he looked at me and he said, well, you know, he says, I'm driving down there with 2 pickup trucks. He says, why don't you load your bicycle on the back of my pickup truck? And then when you get down there, then you can ride it back if you want. Well, full 3 months, a little bit less than 3 months. My bicycle stayed on the back of his pickup truck. So I didn't. So I was in pretty good condition for doing it, but so I served as sort of a driver for Mr. Sauer. So anyway, we loaded the bicycle onto the back of his truck, headed out from Berkeley, going down through Arizona, through Tucson and Douglas, and finally crossed into Chihuahua. And one of the first stops in Chihuahua, well, we stopped and camped. Of course, we were camping the whole time.
Well, what were you collecting? Like what kind of stuff was that?
Well, Mr. Sauer had this grant to look for early man sites, and especially sites that might give some indication that where corn, teosinte, was domesticated. And he also wanted to find some early skeletons of people that had arrowheads in them or early man hearth sites. That was his main objective. So it was a trip that was refreshing his mind, getting him ideas, broad-based ideas about early man, domesticated plants and animals, and what type of animals that the early man was hunting and this sort of thing. So that was sort of the main objective. It was a very enlightening trip to me, obviously. But we were not through with the work that Mr. Sauer was doing by the time we crossed back in the United States. So we went up to Frederick, Oklahoma, where there had been some early man discoveries and some early points, arrowheads. I don't know much about this archaeology stuff, but anyway, we stopped there and did some looking at some of the ravines there. Then went on to Clovis, where the famous Clovis Point was from, and looked around there, and then finally made it back up to Berkeley after some 3 months in the area. So as far as my education is concerned, I think it probably improved a lot. I imagine a lot of knowledge about environment and, say, ecology and this sort of thing sank in on the way. And I can remember when we were coming back into Texas, driving in Texas on the way to New Mexico or something, Mr. Sauer said, well, what are you planning on doing now? And I said, well, I really don't know. And he said, well, you're going to graduate school, aren't you? And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. So I wound up in graduate school with them. So anyway, that was one of those situations where you never know what might happen based on what has happened. Like if I hadn't had this bicycle, I never would have been on this trip. It convinced me also of something that I think I became more and more aware of, and that is that a lot of the things that happen along the way is who knows you as well as who you know. You know, and throw a little bit of luck into there, and it comes out.
Again, we have about 19 hours and 50 more minutes of just the stories. So if you're interested, you know where to find me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jen. Bob Baumann is up next. Would you come up front and center?
Well, Don Davis, I don't know that I can follow up on your thing too well. But anyway, Rita, family, privilege to be up here to speak to you. I have these notes, but at the last minute, Rita came up to me and said, "Now don't you be too gushy, he wouldn't like that." The approach I'm going to do is to just take some personal stories about him and I. And really, there's so many of them, but I'm just going to concentrate on the very early years when I was a student and a little bit after I was his student. And I will say, you know, I saw him about a month. I had breakfast with him. Our relationship lasted till then, about a month before he passed away. So anyway, I will say that it was more than 41 years ago. I drove my car up to the back of the old geoscience building. You could do that back then. No charge, no gates. Just wasn't a boy professor yet, but the highest paid people on campus were boy professors. Made more than the chancellor and more than the football coach. It was a different world. As I walked up the back steps, I was about to meet one of three men who in my lifetime shaped my life and shaped my career. All of them were rather demanding individuals. That's why I left my wife's name out of this. Chronologically, there was my father, there was Jess, and the third one is still around the campus somewhat, Chancellor Emeritus Jim Wharton. I got up there. They were all demanding at times, but as you got to know them, you realize they demanded a hell of a lot more of themselves than they did you. They were driven individuals. And as you got to meet them and know them even more, you realize that actually when they would make a demand, that was actually a compliment. They saw something in you that was worth nurturing and developing. And they were willing to spend their time to help nurture that. I got to the door was open per departmental policy, but the lights were out per Jess Walker policy. No sense wasting electricity when he had that natural light in the back window. Of course, you couldn't see the back window. You couldn't see nothing in that office. It was a maze. He said, "Come on in." And of course, he was waiting for me. I had corresponded with him over the previous year. And I went in for my first meeting with him, about 90 minutes. And a lot of what I'm going to say talks about those first 90 minutes with Jess Walker. We got to the small talk, family histories, this and that. A lot of similarities with my father. Both members of America's Greatest Generation went through the Depression, service in World War II, so forth and so on. Jess also, we got into athletics. Jess said he was a pretty good amateur golfer at one time. Matter of fact, he briefly toyed with the idea of becoming a pro golfer. My father's case was the Brooklyn Dodgers. They offered $375 a month to go to the minor leagues. He was already making $100 a week, so he said, "No, thank you." And there were other similarities as well. And I want to say something about my father, and I think you'll see, it'll be obvious by the time I'm finished. My father never was a particularly complimentary individual, especially to men. He was the fourth generation of now 6 generations in the heavy construction business. But he did admire craftsmanship. particularly from the Art Deco period. And when he came to the Capitol here, he spent 2 hours looking at that marble work. And what was praised to him, this was the ultimate praise, he would say, that man knew his job. On the very rare occasion when I was young that I ever did anything particularly well, he would say to me, you did your job. That was as good as it got. What he didn't say, but he also meant was, stop patting yourself on the back, it's time to move on to the next thing. And you know there was a lot of Just Walker in it, and you'll see why I say this later on. And then we get down to the slides, of course. Turns on that little portable light table and he's got a bunch of slides out there. And of course, you know, some of it is his background, where he'd been, Mauritius, this and that. A lot of things, a million different theses and dissertation topics if you are interested. But Jess was a purist now. He didn't recruit graduate students to do his work and help his career. You work for him, it was your idea, your thesis, it's your work, and he'll teach you. His legacy was not to help him advance, but to help you advance, and you would live beyond him. The second part of that, third part, after we got through the descriptions and possible thesis topic, it was my first pop quiz. I wasn't really ready for it, and I was pretty nervous here in this room, meeting them for the first time and being a brand new graduate student. And I hate to tell you, but I failed. Hell, I didn't know what no pingo was. He just looked like a little old hill to me. And I know they just found in permafrost regions and this and that. And he could tell I was a little nervous, and I didn't realize he was trying to relax me, but he mentioned that. You know what pingos is? There's several probably dissertations and thesis topics there if you want to do it. And you know, one of the things which is intuitively obvious, but has never been actually demonstrated, was that pingos are inactive in the wintertime, but nobody has ever measured that. That would be a good idea. And I'm thinking, boy, this boy can be funny. Huh, give me a break. The Arctic in the wintertime? I'm not this devoted to geography. I may have made a big mistake. Well, this was a joke. You know, this was trying to relax me because he knew I was struggling a little bit. But I was so green, I didn't realize it at all. You know, and he's acting all excited about these pingos, and I'll tell you, I can assure you that excitement was not catching. It was not contagious. Then we go in. Next thing was we go into what courses I'm going to take in my career. Well, the first thing that was obvious that whatever the catalog said, 24 hours this, you know, credits and 30 hours, whatever it was, I was going to be taking a hell of a lot more than that. The second thing we did was what we were going to take that semester. So he brings out his papers out in those days, and I pull out this letter from Don Vermeer, the chairman. And one of the things, welcome to Department of Public, it says, for your coursework, you must get the approval of the departmental graduate student advisor, Dr. Richard Kessel. So I'm thinking, okay, Jess is a full professor. Department chair, military thing, that's higher rank. And I didn't know Dick was kind of new. So I thought, with that title, he's probably more important than Jeff. Wrong again. He sticks his hand out like this, doesn't look at me. Oh, I guess he wanted to see the letter. He took the letter, he looked at it really studied it for probably 5 seconds, handed it back. We don't need that. And we go on to the coursework. And you know, and I don't know if this is still true, the only actual course that was required in geography was the history of geography. And we had discussed, there was also this geology course he thought would be real good for me to take, and I wanted to take it. They both were offered 10:30 Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, once a year. So, you know, I was getting a little braver, so I kind of made the proposal that I would take the geology course first, the second year I would take the history of geography. Now Jess had a little trivia thing that he would say to people. Did you know that in the Inuit language there are 21 different words or terms for our word ice? And of course they all have a different meaning. But in the language of Jess Walker, there was only one meaning to the word no. We were going to take history of geography. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is we come to, I guess 3 years later. The department's going to be reviewed. And I get a call from Mike Harris, who was sort of Jess's first sergeant among the graduate students. A lot of stuff passed from him, from Jess through him to us and vice versa. I was working full-time down at Wetlands at the time, what we used to call Wetlands. It was College of the Coast Environment Management, is that right? And Jess wants to meet with all of us. Ooh, that's important. We go in there, and Mike Harris, and for those of you who remember Mike was a big man. And he goes in first, and that took up all the rest of the space in that little office. So the rest of us were in that little corridor, and of course you couldn't see Jess, but I knew he was standing. Standing also was big time important. And I knew he was standing, because I couldn't see him, but I could see that hand past the bookcase. He was animated. Department is going to be a big review, outside review. Geography is one of the first two departments to undergo this kind of extensive review. We're all going to have to do some things and so forth and so on. Fine. And the reviewers may want to meet with us, the graduate students. So we get to that week. The department is on edge, has been on edge, put in a lot of work. We did whatever we were asked to do. And sure enough, the reviewers want to meet with the grad students. And it was like an hour meeting, and it was maybe 20 of us, I would say. And they were all sort of more senior people, as I recall. And, you know, everything was supposed to be confidential. But you're looking around at 20 other students, you get a lot of curious faculty, what the hell, what's going on? You know, this ain't going to be no secret. So we're not going to do any real complaining, other than the amount of graduate assistantships and how small they were. So it's kind of like kumbaya. And they weren't happy with that, obviously. I get a call from Jess Walker that night at home. Now, Jess Walker never called you at home on business. You only called on business hour. You called me at home, he was having a dinner party, and we were going to be invited. And my wife was expected to bring the cheesecake. Remember that? So anyway, no, this was business. The reviewers weren't happy. I mean, he didn't express it that way. They want to meet with some individually, one-on-one. Can you make it at 2 o'clock? How am I a chosen one? You know, I don't even remember saying anything in that meeting. So I said, I was curious, and I said, well, how many of them are they going to meet with? He said, 3 or 4. He was annoyed. He didn't like the question. And I asked him, well, would you like to meet with you before the interview or after to give a briefing? No, that would be inappropriate. It's old school. He's old school. So I went to the meeting. I met with Sam Hilliard and Bill Davis, and when I came out of the room, they were just begging for me to say something to me. But anyway, I went back. The review went extremely well. And even though the written review didn't come back, the exit interview with the administration at the end of the week went well. I come by that following Monday morning. I go in, faculty are in the hallway talking, 2 over here, 2 over there, slapping each other on the back. They're so happy. It's very rare to see faculty talking in the hall. I go in to see Jess, and I knock on the door, come on in. He's sitting down, working on some manuscript. I said, geez, things went really well. They went as they should have, but we have not seen the written report. He says, well, you know, people did a lot of work. A lot of people did a lot of work in preparation for this. he says to me, and you did your job. Not the same way or the same inflection that my father used to say, but it really struck me. And then he said the thing my father didn't say. As far as those faculty in the hall, it's over. They need to get back in their office and get back to work. One more short story. Okay. I finished my thesis. Oh, he brought in a few extra people and let me know the day before. Another Boyd professor, another that would become a distinguished research master, which was unusual back then for that to happen. It was over, everything went well. A little time, you get over it, you want to get away from it for a little bit, now we're going to do the paper. So I go into his office, and we talk about possible journals and so forth. And I get on to the thing of authorship, and Jess says, no, as an author. Well, what do you think? You'd think, oh, God, how did he pass it? He didn't like this thing at all. He didn't want his name on it. No, that wasn't it. It wasn't his work. It was your work. You published. Bill McIntyre told me the same thing. Old school. They were old school. And now John Day, who I worked with, and Gene's here at college, they worked together. Same vintage down there at Wetlands. John was real excited in what I'd done, and he didn't want me to go submit to some journal. He wanted me to put it in Science. And I said, oh, come on, it's never. Sure enough, he did his politic and the short note comes out in Science. You know, one thing about Science, there's a hell of a quick turnaround, or at least there was back then. It came out a few weeks later. Well, I hadn't seen Jess. We were busy. We had lots of grants and contracts. We worked with 70-hour weeks. I hadn't seen Jess in a couple of months, and I forgot to tell him. I get a call from Jess. You got a few minutes? I want to show you something. It's okay. So I go up to the office, meet him that afternoon, and I didn't know the Science issue had come out yet. And he had it on his desk, but it was open off to the side where I really couldn't see it, and then open to the article, and he points at it, and he says, do you know who this guy is? And so I had to kind of lean over, and sure enough, it was my name. It's that. And he starts laughing. He was so proud. He was standing up. He wasn't sitting down. He was standing up. For me. And we got through some niceties about it, and then we got to stop patting yourself on the back. And he said to me, now when am I going to see the next one? Like my father, who used to admire, or still admired, the master craftsman, that's what Jess was. He was a master craftsman. He knew his job. He did it well. And I'll miss him. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Our next speaker will be Baumann McGraw from Southeastern Louisiana.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for having me. I'm delighted to have to talk about Walker. I first met him as a graduate student about 13, 14 years ago. And I pretty much fell in love with the art activities from across research. And after I graduated...
Can't hear you.
Can't hear you. Okay. And after I graduated, I used to come up here about 3 times a week during the summer and during the break, and every week during the semester because we were doing research. I'm going to try to answer a question that Greg asked me to address, and it was, how did Dr. Walker have the passion? How, what drove him to work, coming to the office 3 times a week, to publish papers continuously into his 90s? And so I'm going to try to answer that question. We know that Dr. Walker was very, very prolific. These are some photographs of his office. And the photo on the left shows his body of work. And it's about 1,600 items. And it consists of journal articles, reports, book chapters, etc. We also had about 100,000 slides. And the slides were part of his research, and slides from all over the world. And then he had a separate lab downstairs, and that's pretty much where I kind of camped out. He had about I think about 30,000 slides just dealing with the art. But how does a man produce this? And how does he, like I said, stay prolific into his 90s? Well, I'm going to try to answer this for you, but I have to take you on a journey. And I'm going to cover some of the same things that Don talked about and that Jennifer talked about. So some of it will be a little bit of a review. Dr. Walker grew up, and he was born in Michigan, and his family moved to Colorado, and they finally ended up in Morro Bay, California. And this was during the height of the Depression. They were very, very, very poor, and he attended the local elementary, junior high schools. And there he made an impression on the teachers. And there were two teachers that he said that were extremely, extremely kind to him. One was the librarian, the other one was the Latin teacher. And these teachers, one of them actually gave him a coat, and very, very good, took care of him. And he was so impressed and by these two teachers that when he was able to, he created a scholarship at the high school for these two teachers. He also impressed the principal at the high school. And the principal, well, they were updating the library. And they were getting ready to throw out encyclopedias. We don't throw out books. Keep them. Well, this is a set of encyclopedias that Dr. Walker picked up that they were going to get rid of. And these encyclopedias are from the 1890s. And I took a picture of this. This is from his library at home. A beautiful, beautiful old set of encyclopedias from his principal. He graduated in 1939. This is his high school yearbook. And I'd like to point out, that's the yellow circle, and I love the hairdo. But if you look at the likes, I have it underlined, it says chemistry. Okay? Look at beneath that, we have Mr. Whitlock. His likes is pretty nonchalant. If you look at Miss Winter over there, she likes people with glasses. But here you have Dr. Walker, man, he likes chemistry. So it's something's a little different here. Right? Well, he worked several jobs when he was in high school. One as a janitor. He delivered newspapers on a famous bicycle to save money to go to college. And he went to school at Berkeley, the UC Berkeley, right up the road. Started working on a degree in geography. However, his studies were interrupted by World War II. He joined the Marines and became a pilot, and his plane was a R4D, if I have identification correct. And what he did, he flew all across the Pacific Ocean, and he kept a log of every island that he stopped at and the date. And I saw the little book, it's about yay big, and it was just very, very, very meticulous. And he was that way with everything, very meticulous, and kept logs of everything. Well, he was finishing up his studies, and this comes in the famous trip to Mexico. Right? This is a photograph of Dr. Walker on his bicycle. And he graduated from Berkeley with his bachelor's degree. He was going to join Sauer, and just heard the story in his own words, that he was going to ride the bike to Mexico. Well, before that, what he was doing, he was finishing up that independent study with a professor at Berkeley. And the independent study was to use his bicycle to travel around and locate quarries around Berkeley. And he figured, okay, then he was going to ride his bike because he was going to get credit for the class, but he was also going to build up muscles for this bike ride to Mexico. Well, we know now that he hitched a ride with Klaus Meyer-Arendt, and he ended up staying with Sauer. He became the graduate student of Sauer, and he went to Berkeley for his master's degree. His master's thesis is a piece of art. I've seen it. It's somewhere in his office now. We don't know where, but it's somewhere in his office. But we do have a copy of it. And the thesis, the name of it was a study of the rainfall of Mexico. And point out a couple of things. First of all, this is a thesis. It's about 300 pages long. Thesis, master's thesis, not a dissertation, thesis. It had 55 figures, and those are the ones on the left. They're hand-drawn and hand-colored. He did all this. He was an artist. He had about 30 different tables. These are all drawn, hand-engraved. And the most impressive thing are the 13 plates at the upper right-hand corner. And these are fold-out plates, and they're all hand-colored. It's a beautiful, beautiful document, and he did it. And very, 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 very meticulous. Well, he moves from, he goes to, and then graduates from Berkeley. He goes to Georgia for a while. This is where he meets Mrs. Walker. But he ends up here at Berkeley on the Bayou, the LSU Geography Department. And what it was, he wanted to work with Niven and Russell. They were both products of Berkeley. And so he came here. And while he was here, he was going to shift his research focus from the dry Mexico to the Arctic. And the reason he did this was because he got funding. He became a friend of Evelyn Pruitt. This is what this lecture is named after. And Evelyn Pruitt worked for the Office of Naval Research. And the Office of Naval Research had money. And so they funded his study. And this is a copy of his dissertation. They turned the dissertation into a book. And what he did, he traveled the Arctic, the Alaskan Arctic, and also portions of the Canadian Arctic. And he documented, the habits of the people, the landforms. It was an all-encompassing volume. And this was during the height of the Cold War. So this was groundbreaking material, very, very important material. And it was during the end of this field work that he was flying across the coastline of Alaska. And he flew across this river that's circled by red. And he looked down and said, I'm going to study that river. And the river is the Colville River. And he decided that he was going to work on the Colville. The Colville is the largest river on the North Slope. And he wanted something different. He said, everyone was working in Louisiana, everyone's working on the Mississippi River. I want to work on a different river. I'm going to work on the Colville. And the Colville had something that's really cool. It had that ice, the permafrost. He worked in the Colville, worked in the Arctic, I guess for maybe 60 years or so, if not better. And he was one of the pioneers in Arctic research, particularly American Arctic research. He helped establish Arliss, which is a research lab. These are some photographs of Dr. Walker in the field. The one at the lower left is a very early photograph, and he's with his very close friend, Job Woods. And Job was a native of the Colville. He assisted Dr. Walker during all of his field activities. And the photo at the top right is one that I took with Dr. Walker and Job. I guess it was probably maybe 5 years ago. Also, Dr. Walker produced, like I said, many papers and such. But one of his loves was this Colville River. And he actually bound a number of the papers together. And you can see this is volumes 1, 2, 3, and then a whole bunch of other papers together. There are actually 4 volumes, and that represents papers that he wrote just on the Colville from about 1960 to about the 1990s. So it doesn't even count the past 15 years. He also had 2 papers that had been published after his death. And fittingly, both of these papers involve the Alaskan Arctic and the Colville River. And I am very honored to say that I'm co-author on both the papers. The first paper, Maintaining the Integrity, was published in the supplemental issue of Site Chief, Geomorphology, and it was the editor of the Site Chief supplement was Paul Hudson, who's a graduate of the department. And then the second one, Closing the Gap, that was published in Focus by Craig and Virginia. So like I said, I still haven't answered this question. How did he work through, how was he so prolific into his 90s? Yeah, it's kind of. His other area of research was coastal. Right? He worked at coastlines in North America, Asia, and in Europe. And he was recognized for this. He has a slew of awards and such. And one is the Patrick Medal from the Royal Geographical Society. He also kept, it was amazing, I've heard about these documents. As we were, I was with Tara, and as we were opening up some of these drawers, kind of sorting through his offices, opened up a drawer. These are his notes from his undergraduate, graduate classes. And you pull them out, and these are some of the handwritten notes. And one of the amazing things, you can actually read the handwriting back then, because now you can navigate it all. And you open up these folders, they're typed notes with all the corrections. Typical Dr. Walker, everything's corrected and everything's done in pencil. He has exams from 1947, final exam. Examples of some of the notes that he took as a student. He kept them all. And then also, you all these beautiful drawings and such. Just absolutely amazing. He also, like I said, he spent a lot of time in the field. He loved doing field work. And in the Arctic, he would typically go there during the summer months, but he'd also go sometimes during the winter. He always had the latest technology. Right? He had meticulous notes, and these are some of the notes of his field notes that he still has. And if you look at the diagram, on the left, typical of that you'd find in any of his studies. And the data was hand collected. These things were hand drawn. Everything was hand calculated. But like I said, he loved technology. He kept it best. He knew how to do PowerPoint better than me. He could do Word. He could do Excel, Photoshop. New computers. He knew that. He definitely believed in technology. I come in, and the reason I started working with him because Craig contacted me that Dr. Walker needed someone to do remote sensing and GIS, and I do a little of that. And so I started doing work like this with him. And I'm a Louisiana girl. I don't like cold weather. I just and so I could do this really cool research from the lab here at Baton Rouge, and I could use the technology. Dr. Walker would always buy the latest program and such. Also want to mention that he loved technology. He loved to learn. And in fact, the department bought him an iPad. The day before he died, he was learning how to operate this iPad. Luke Driscoll was at his house, and Dr. Walker was taking notes on how to operate this thing. He was going to learn. Also, project planning. I said, he worked with many researchers, but I know from my own experience how we would do it. We would usually start off in March, and he'd come up with a list of projects that he wanted. I'd come up with a list of things I would want to do. We'd go to the union over coffee. We'd get a small, I'd get a medium, and we'd have coffee. And we would plan the year, how we were going to, what conferences we wanted to go to, what type of research we wanted to do, and it was all done over coffee. He also kept abreast of us. This is a shot of his office, and you could see all the journals. He was an editor. He was a founding editor of many journals in geomorphology, particularly the Arctic journals. But he also, he would look at all the journals. He would look at all the papers that would come out. Anything dealing with the Arctic, dealing with the Coville, dealing with permafrost, dealing with coastal, and dealing with Louisiana, he would make a copy of. And he would make a copy of, and he would put them in a database. This database was had I think like 16,000 entries in it, just absolutely amazing. Also, he just didn't focus on geomorphology. This came up. This is Evelyn Pruitt's sea chest. It belonged to her great-great-great-grandfather. And this arrived at LSU and had a photograph of Dr. Walker and Dr. Roberts unpacking this wonderful treasure trove. And he and I, before he died, we were working on the book on this wonderful sea chest. So he just, like I said, he was interested in just about everything. So, still haven't answered that. Where did he get his drive and passion to work into these things? You know, how could a man, he was recognized as something special when he was a child. He became a pilot, and he still had his logbooks. He decided he was just going to go tool around, Mexico on a bike, and ended up working with one of the most famous geographers in the world. He ended up being a pioneer of Arctic research, producing about 200 journal articles and book chapters. How did he do this? How did he do this? Well, it was just who he was. He couldn't help it. That was just who he was. He was a really, really special person. He was always wanted to learn, and he loved sharing the knowledge. If you were interested in what he was interested in, he would definitely help you. I was very, very lucky to work with him. I'm going to leave you with this photograph of Dr. Walker and I. We're on the North Slope. This is on the Sag River. This is for his 87th birthday. And I will tell you, we're not drinking coffee in these cups. So, as the Inuit of the Coville will say, Kanoyapuk, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, colleague. Our next speaker will be Klaus Meyer-Arendt from the University of West Florida.
Well, I can't top any of these talks, so I'll probably disappoint you, and I'll cut it short to make up for that. These were excellent. Don, Bob, all said things. Obviously, I recognize Jess Walker very well from all the anecdotes I've heard here today. So, and I could go off on those tangents even more to reinforce what was said. They were excellent. But I put together some slides, and I thought we'd use that as a framework, just talk a little bit. I was kind of a non-traditional student. I'd actually dropped out my sophomore year of college and ended up traveling a lot and went over Latin America and ended up back at Portland State, my home state. And at Portland State, the faculty there was a lot of influence from the University of Washington. A lot of the quantitative revolution folks were there. But there was also a couple of faculty members that had a strong human environment, or man-land as they call it then, in Berkeley School influences. So I quickly got exposed to the Berkeley School, especially the writings of Carl Sauer, and especially after my travels in Latin America, I definitely had a strong interest in Latin America. For what it's worth, Portland State had a physical geographer who was also an Arctic and alpine specialist, Larry Price, who had worked on pingos, and so I was familiar with some of these terms when I came here. With other folks. So this was kind of my route. When I was looking, I think I was a senior at Portland State when I had no idea what I was going to do next, and somebody said, well, you probably graduate school material, and so I started looking around at schools, and I liked the Berkeley approach, and I'll cut these stories short, but I ended up at LSU. I did look at several other schools, but I liked LSU for the traditional approach to geography, and also for the proximity to Latin America, where I figured I could fly down for $100 in my spare time, like Christmas breaks and things like that, where from Oregon it would have cost about 3 times that. So I came down here. It was actually Bill Davidson that really encouraged me to come down here. In fact, what's funny, when I applied at LSU, and I came down here to visit, there was no record of my application materials. And my first thought is, what kind of school is this? Here we are in the South, people lose all my stuff. I don't know if I want to come here. But Bill Davidson, we'll take care of this. It'll work out. And like I said, I did visit every place I applied to, and I was most impressed here. I was most impressed with Dr. West, and I was very lucky to have quite a few classes from him during my master's career in the 70s. And I ended up working on a Latin American topic. This is not all about me, by the way. We're going to get to Walker here in a minute. But I did finish up my master's degree finally working on guava paste production in the Colombian Andes. And, but at the same time I was here at LSU doing a lot of cultural historical work, I was very interested in some of the coastal work that was being done here. I really had no idea about coastal studies, but I took classes from John Day and other folks in marine science. And my friend and colleague and the student was Shay Penland at the time. I think he came a semester after I did. And he always needed a field. He was a workaholic, as many of you know, if you know him. And here's Bill Ritchie pounding some steaks to get ready to do some profiling down coming out of beach somewhere. So I developed kind of a secondary interest in coastal studies. And but more than just doing beach profiles or looking at dunes or looking at coastal morphology, I wanted to somehow blend my interest in the cultural historical, blend the human and the coast. And so I was interested in these kind of scenes. Especially Louisiana is full of great examples of humans not adapting too well to the coast. And this was also the time when these 3 books that we've already heard about came out in the 70s. Some of these are based on Symposium, maybe even all of them, I'm not sure. I think one of them came out the year before I got here. But this was a very timely time, and so I scarfed these things up. I knew Jess Walker, or I met him. He was never on any committee. I never had a class from him as a master's student. But we would meet and, got along great. Although I did hear a lot of anecdotes from students that, oh, he's really gruff, he works you to death, all kinds of negative stories. But I never felt that, I never saw that personally, so you'll never hear me say anything like that. But anyway, I hadn't worked with him too much. However, when it came time for the AAG, Jess Walker was, of course, the organizer, logistical coordinator of the whole meeting. Shay Penland was his main, kind of as Bob Baumann talked about Mike Harris earlier, so I guess Shay kind of took that role a few years later. And I was probably the number 2. I probably was the number 2 student to put in the most hours on this meeting than anyone here at LSU. I forget the number of hours. I couldn't match Shay, but we got to know each other real well there, organizing this meeting, which I think many of you that were there at the time will remember is one of the best there was. Well, I ended up, even before I finished my master's and after I finished, I ended up working for Coastal Environments Incorporated, Woody Gagliano. I know he's here somewhere. Okay. And I had a pretty good experience working there. Mike Harris briefly worked there as a coastal morphologist. And when he left, I kind of wormed my way into that role. Even though I didn't quite have the training that Mike did, I've done his PhD. But I kind of started taking classes at LSU even after my master's, working there with Woody. And I worked there for over 3 years, and it was really a valuable experience. Karen Wicker, who's also in the audience here, worked very carefully. I think they were very, I think was it Bob that made a comment that, that Jess Walker tried to nurture you or push you in the right direction. I felt that their coastal environment was very good. But at some point, I felt that I didn't want to just work on client projects. I wanted to do some of my own research and get back to the coast. So anyway, I was kind of floundering a little bit. And I thought, well, before I get too old, I really should get a PhD. And I hadn't really thought about it too much. And some people said, oh, you can't go back to LSU. You got your master's there. And Jim Parsons at Berkeley said he would take me on as a student. I was flattered to hear that. But now this is a little out of place and has nothing to do with what I'm saying, but I thought you'd enjoy the photo. Jess and Butler. Well, Jess Walker, he came to me and says, Klaus, you know what you need to do? You need to come back to LSU, work with me, do a dissertation. So here I'm kind of floundering. I always know what I'm doing. I'm a very strong strong-willed person. But sometimes you need a little push like that, and he gave me that push. He said, come back, work with me, or write for some grant money, do something with humans on the coast. Again, I wasn't going to work on any of his projects, but he had taken an interest, maybe I can do that on the next slide. He had started taking an interest not just in pure coastal geomorphology, although we could argue from what we heard in the last talk that he really started doing, man-land things in the Arctic, but he kind of got away from that to do pure deltaic morphology, coastal morphology. But then somewhere in the 70s, he also started looking at human impacts. Especially one of his big research areas was artificial structures, or even more generically, human modification of the coast. And I think that's where he kind of wanted me to do something along those lines. So, and this book came out actually a little bit later. So I came back, and of course Don showed this picture. I took that picture in one of the classes. Had a couple specialty courses with Jess, a lot of field trips. Often got Don Davis involved, Jim McCloy, Galveston. You've heard some of these names already. But I don't know what to say. I mean, he would never tell you things. He would kind of make you think for yourself. Push you in a direction and you figure it out. And I kind of like that. And what's funny now that I'm still teaching at University of West Florida, now so many students need their hands held and led which way to go, and this wasn't the case there. And I don't know, I still do that now, and people say, well, you're not as warm and fuzzy as you should be. Well, maybe, but anyway. So anyway, we wanted to, he even suggested, because I told Jess, well, I'm not interested in the Arctic either. And at that time, this was in about '82 when I was coming back to school, and very few of his, especially PhD students, had not done Arctic theses or dissertations. Very few. I think Karen Wicker was one exception. But he said, why don't you work in the Gulf of Mexico? And you started looking to do something with the humans in the Gulf of Mexico. He didn't say do anything with human modification. And so I kind of got into environmental impacts, kind of got me into tourism a little bit. So I wrote this proposal for NSF and didn't get it. I was brokenhearted. I said, oh man, all this effort I put into this and what I proposed, and I was ready to chuck it all. I didn't know what to do. Jess says, no problem, rewrite it. We're going to do it again. And again, that push is exactly what worked. And sure enough, and in fact, some of the reviewers, I got to mention this, some of the reviewers said, don't work in Mexico, just stick to the US. You'll find more data. Mexico's going to be hard to get anything, blah, blah, blah. And I told Jess, I have to do the Mexico. I am, Latin America's, and he didn't, maybe because of his own master's thesis on rainfall in Mexico, but he did not disagree with me. He said, rewrite it, we're going to push it through, we're going to address everything else. And I finally went through, and that's what happened. Surprisingly, I eventually graduated, wrote a dissertation, Mike Tiger behind me there. And it was the only time I ever attended a graduation. I figured this was my last one. And Jess was there. I should mention, there weren't very many students. I was tied with Ron Terry to be a second. I think later on he took another student. It's a long story I won't get into, but he had one student after us. But we both graduated at the same time. We were his last PhD students. And I think the year later, his last master's student, Doug Roselle, finished up. So we were in that last cohort here, and he had already officially retired. Now, even after retirement, we kept in touch and met. This was in Hawaii, 1999. Not only did we pose for a picture together here, as you see, but we also hiked to Green Sand Beach and had a good chance to talk about a lot of stuff. And again, he was always working on a million projects. And I was always, I'm never going to be that good. I've got a pretty good record, but it's nothing compared to Jess Walker. And I know that, but still, it's really great. He really inspired me a lot. And some of you can jump on ahead. This was at the Tampa AAG in 2014. If anyone looks close, I'm actually wearing my 1978 AAG name tag. But we met up there, and I was talking to him a little bit, and I said, Jess, I'm going to go to Japan this summer. I've always been Latin Americanist. In fact, I've been to every country except Cuba in Latin America. But I had a chance to go to Japan for the summer in 2014. And so, I wanted to look at some of the tsunami impacts for what they call the 311 over there that led to the Fukushima meltdown and all that. And so Jess says, well, come by my office. I've got a bunch of slides. We'll look at all this. You can kind of retrace and do some before and afters. And so I did that. So that was also in 2014, and that's the last time I saw him. We did correspond after that, but went to his office. I was really surprised. I came by here on a weekday. The apartment was totally empty. He told me he still came in 3 or 4 days a week, and the halls were empty. I couldn't believe it. This is not the LSU I remember from the 70s or even 80s. But loaned me all slides. I mailed them all back. They're all probably refiled by now. And of course, he insisted on taking Don and I out to Louis, and I always look terrible on photos. But the other two look pretty good there. But to cap things off, last year, or not that long ago, a few months ago, 2015, my wife and I did a big cross-country trip, and we drove down the coast from the northwest, Oregon, and spent the night in Morro Bay. And I wanted to just sit there and gaze on the coast. Reflect a little bit on Jess Walker and reform that. That was a tribute to Walker. I'll quit. Thank you.
Thank you to all the speakers. This has been a wonderful tribute to Jess Walker, our colleague and our friend. We'll take a brief break now. We're running a bit behind schedule. We will start the Pruitt lecture in 10 minutes, but we have some coffee and drinks. Take advantage of the facilities. We'll be back in 10. Thank you.